And it said at one point, when I read that you said blah, 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 it made me laugh. And I just thought, fuck you. Like, AI doesn't laugh.
Don't you lie to me. Don't you lie to me, friend.
But the thing is, it's as if I told the two of you such a bald-faced lie. It's a stupidity, right?
There's sort of an art form to helping someone to understand what it is they like about something too. If we go with photography, it's often that people have about 400 different inspiration photos, or they might just have 5 and they can't quite tell you, and they show them to you and they say, I like this kind of thing, I like these ones. And it's not clear what it is that they like about each of them. And it's sometimes not even clear to them. Like, here's 5 photos of something I like on other people. And it's quite hard to take that and understand what is it exactly you like about that and how is that relevant to what I'm going to be able to do. There's this confusion that can be introduced, I think, when there's too much choice, there's too much flooding social media. I like that photo, I like that one. Sometimes it's just that they like the way a different person looks. That is not at all how they look, and it's actually nothing to do with the photo per se, you know. So I think there's also an art form to helping trying to figure out what the client is asking for. And after social media, that ballooned, like just that part of the process, really trying to understand what they're asking for and what they're going to be happy with. I do see some of that in my work. I've spoken about it a lot before.
Yes, I think that change where people come to you telling you what they want because they've used the internet and they feel like they know. I think this is an industry-wide thing. I think it's similar to, there's a sense in which you read Dostoevsky not because you like Dostoevsky, but because Dostoevsky is going to tell you what you don't know that you need to know, right? Like that, it's really, really important in life to go into things to let them kind of teach you what you ought to want, like to let them teach you what is actually good. And now the problem is, of course, that could be a totalitarian thing where you come in and trust and they take advantage of people. And I think people are worried about that in various industries, or I'm paying so much money, I want to make sure I get pictures I like. You know, it's my health. I want to make sure I'm not taking advantage of it. I think there's a lot of worry and concern. And that's understandable. But then there's also a ditch on either side of the road, because if you go into things in order to confirm they align with your wants and desires, as opposed to let them teach you what you ought to want and desire, then your world is very, very small. I mean, for me, a lot of times conversations like this or philosophy or theology, often there's a thinking of, I don't know actually the ideas I need to think. I don't know what I need to talk about and be concerned about. And one of the reasons you commit to keep putting yourself in places like this or talk is precisely because you actually want to kind of continually be under something that can teach you, or under something that can form you in ways that you don't know you need to be formed, right? And I think there's something about how, for me, these spaces are actually kind of regaining something that in the market is increasingly lost, because people come into fields telling the field what to do, and if you don't, I won't. And the market selects then for people that cater to the wants of the client. But sometimes the client, you know, often the stuff we need in life that's good for us is hard, and the client doesn't want that. So then they're not going to want those services. And or the book you need in your life is hard, and you have to think about it and work on it really hard. Well, we don't want that. Well, then the market will select for the versions of the book or the practice that don't demand people in the way that they need in order to kind of develop. And for me, there's something about the kind of, again, and I'll stop, just spaces like this that is actually part of that continual, let me make sure there are some spaces in my life where I can still be introduced to something that I don't know I need to be introduced to, that I can think thoughts I don't know that I need to think, and kind of be introduced to those things. In addition to the continual and utterly important life-saving, well, it is a matter of life and death, continual cultivation of friendship. That those things really, really strongly go together. And there's something about trusting someone to teach your drives and desires that's tied to friendship, I think, in an important way.
I was going to bring in trust. That's, yeah. Now I have to think how I was going to bring it in.
Well, I will know just quickly, like with Feldenkrais, you know, I trust a friend, trust Steph's like, you ought to do Feldenkrais. Okay. Because you kind of trust Feldenkrais, right? Like, you're like, that's something you need in your life. that you don't know you need in your life, and Seth came down to is amazing. That
But you know
practice.
Seth, and you trust
Yeah, that's
Seth,
right.
and
Yeah,
there's a
that's right.
relationship with Seth. If he
Yeah,
was
yeah,
just
yeah.
some guy on the street who popped into the farm,
Yeah,
well, maybe you
exactly.
would. Daniel's pretty good. Maybe you would say.
Sometimes
Hey,
I just
I know.
hang out on the street and offer Feldenkrais randomly. I don't tell people what it is or say you want some Feldenkrais, but yeah, it doesn't
Land?
really land somehow.
I think it's the name. It needs some better marketing.
Feldenkrais.
They don't know how to spell it.
Well,
Go ahead.
I came on the call, and of course, I'm anticipating someone asking me what I'm thinking about. No one did, so I just asked myself. But,
Trust and friendship.
But what I'm thinking about, and actually, I even want to say what I'm trying to feel. And I have been thinking about this for the past couple of days. But also, I was just listening to a couple of podcasts around technology and AI, and they weren't necessarily saying anything new, but just what is the impact? Where are we going? That kind of thing. And also, I listened recently to your conversation, Daniel, with Michelle about what you call dream equality. Like the idea that AI is sort of built on the premise that everything could be known, everything could be achieved. And of course, even if AI doesn't do that yet, a lot of the language around it is essentially pointing as if that's where eventually we'll get to. So let's just keep beating the drum in that direction. And going back to the podcast, I was listening to there was two guys talking, Angel Acosta and Thomas Hubel. Angel Acosta, I can't remember exactly, but he's someone who's very involved in technology stuff. Thomas Hubel organizes collective trauma healing summits, conferences, it does trainings, does all kinds of things. So Angel Acosta said something about the billions and trillions of parameters that AI uses, and that it deals in tokens, and that there's like trillions of tokens, and then the phenomenal speed with which it's all calculated, in the blink of an eye to spit something out. And he just kind of says, dang, this is really overwhelming, right? And what Thomas Hubel said in response, which was really interesting, was he says, well, think about this conversation we're having. It's actually the product of, billions of years of evolution, and how many trillions of cells in our bodies and how many different, processes are going on just for us to be able to sit upright and interact. And he said, if you think of humanity as a supercomputer, it's actually incredibly complex and sophisticated what it can do. But of course, we tend to think of, he said, the individual laptops, which are all very slow. But anyway, I really appreciate that, because just to bring it to what I myself have been thinking about recently, I had one of my workshops over the weekend, the Musicality of Being workshop, where we're essentially trying to feel our way into interconnectivity. We're trying to come to a place by the end of the workshop where we feel more like one organism than the other, than separate organisms doing something together. And even including the sounds of the park, the cars driving by, or the sounds of the birds, and really hearing the Gestalt, feeling the Gestalts, like the movement of my thoughts inside my head as you speak. And oh, you said something, and now the thoughts in my head changed direction. Oh, then there was an emotional current that passed through, and that all of this is happening. It's hopelessly complex to try to literally track it all as individual, but to sort of open the envelope of attention that wide. And then what I think you do is and this is the thing that AI doesn't do with this sort of momentum towards dream equality. But if you include the fact that I couldn't possibly process all of this, then you just have to admit the obvious, that there's a mystery. There's always a mystery. It's always here. It's always playing a role. Like just all of this stuff that's going on in my stomach to, deal with my dinner that I'm not thinking about. I mean, I sort of know it's happening. I could read books about it. That human understanding gives me a framework for thinking about it, but I don't literally know. And if I ate something I shouldn't have ate, maybe I'll find that out in 20 minutes, and that'll be totally unexpected too. All of these kinds of things. So then when I came on the call and Daniel was talking about the client who wants a certain kind of photo, but they just, or maybe you were saying this, Aspasia, but they show you dozens of photos and they don't quite know what it is, but there's something, they're feeling something, and then they bring it to you. And if this is your area, you have, like, I think the so-called experts of many kinds of fields and who offer many kinds of services are helping to navigate the unknown. I don't know exactly what I want, but I like all of these things. Or these therapy clients that come to you, Aspasia, and they've read a bunch of things. I almost wanted to say, like, if they're confused, they're more sophisticated in their confusion. There's something, that they're coming in that they don't understand and they want your help with. But then, if the client, comes away with the wedding photo that they love, or if the therapy client comes away with more clarity about their life, you and them together, and this is just two humans, not the vast supercomputer of all humanity, but you have navigated the unknown together, and you have, found something new. So, I think at the end of this podcast, I didn't hear the end. I think Angela Costa and Thomas Hubel were starting to imagine, well, how could we get together, a bunch of people, do a bunch of different practices, have a bunch of different conversations. Maybe we'll all interact with AI together. Anyway, they were just sort of speculating about an experiment that they could run. But it was like, well, AI is dealing with these billions of parameters. Maybe we could stack on more parameters than usual, but we're going to plug in a bunch of humans together and, run a complex protocol. And, we're going to use presence. A big part of it, of course, was going to be practicing presence. And let's see what we come up with. And it was just, they were just sort of putting this out, like, wouldn't this be interesting? Which is, I think, kind of what we do when we get together. We don't necessarily say, well, let's figure out X today, but we do say, I'm thinking about X, Y, and Z, and I wonder, where they go. So, yeah. And I mean, the last invitation that I just like to put forward is that we really try to track how this conversation feels as it unfolds, that we potentially think that we are a three-headed organism, that when you speak, you're kind of saying my thoughts that I couldn't complete. Like, I even do this sometimes in dialogue with people, that I try to just assume that, like, when I run out of juice, the organism is still working on it. And anyway, I'll throw that in as a potential frame for whatever else we do.
Well, that makes me think of the energetics, which I know we've all been talking about a lot more recently. There's something too about, I'll just use the example with therapy because it's nearer to me, but I'm imagining, and from speaking to others, I know this does apply to other fields, things like we were talking about photography or whatever it is whatever it is. But when someone comes, I guess there's a distinction for me around, and it's not always clear cut, and it can be a bit of each, obviously, but there is something about turning up with a whole lot of inspiration, if we call it that, and inspiration, research, and sort of showing it to this person and being like, I want something like this. As a sort of a genuine starting point and a willingness to engage in, like, the mystery of, well, what is it exactly about these things that ties them all together or that speaks to you? And I do think for the practitioner or for the artist or whoever it is that's being presented with this by a client, I do think that's a separate skill set, if we call it that. which is not always emphasized, which is sort of what I was getting at the start. There are, and I mean, you see this even with teachers, teachers who might have this incredible knowledge about mathematics. But for the life of them, they cannot get that. They can't teach that information. They can't. I mean, I had a maths teacher like that, which is why I'm, brilliant man. You could see it, and you could see the frustration in him trying to get these concepts across to, young children. And it was just not, it just wasn't a canyon he could cross, I don't think. And so it is a separate skill set. It's not necessarily the case that you're going to be able to sit down with a client and help work with them to understand, well, what is it that ties all these things together? What is it exactly that you think you might be asking for from me? Now, when it comes to something like therapy, I think there's a little bit more crossover there. So yes, it probably comes a bit easier. But I think about, I don't know, say I'm a painter and now I've got, someone coming to me with 20 different inspiration pictures from Instagram, and they're all kind of wildly different. And they say, I just like these, so sort of paint me something based on this stuff. Now, again, the painter might be able to look at them and sort of just almost in a non-verbal, I don't know if it's pattern recognition, kind of apprehension, creative way, take something from it, have an understanding of something within themselves of what that might be about, what might tie them together. But again, translating that into speech and checking in with the client about that. And it's a really rocky terrain. I'm not quite sure how people navigate that, because I mean, I've definitely had that experience before. I can point out to you a whole bunch of paintings that I love. And I couldn't for the life of me tell you what it is that ties those things together. I could speculate. But then I think about, well, if I'm going to someone and asking them to create something that sort of represents some kind of average of all these different inspiration pictures, I'm not even entirely sure what I'm asking them to do, if that makes sense. So there's a real going into the unknown together. I agree with you. I have gone sideways. Oh, what I was trying to say is there's a difference between, so if someone turns up, say to therapy, lots of ideas about what they need and what they don't want and what they do want. And if that's a starting point and there's still an openness to sort of letting the other person in, letting the therapist in, and a willingness to have their initial thoughts and ideas challenged somewhat and questioned, and to grow and to change and to shift and to let this other person into the relationship, essentially, that's one thing. But oftentimes I'm seeing it operating as just an initial, very firm sort of concrete wall of, it's almost a wanting to dehumanize, I think. And when it comes to therapy, it's very complicated, because I think some people, and some therapists do operate like that. And it's sort of unclear as to how much you're meant to humanize or not humanize this person. Are they meant to just be the blank slate? Am I meant to lie down on a couch and not look at them? Like what goes on here? There's a lot of, and it's very different. So there is a defensive way that it can be used, is all I'm trying to say, that actually obviously narrows possibility, and doesn't, it doesn't let another, I guess the reason I pointed out is it's not really letting another person into a relationship, depending on how important that is and whatever interaction we're talking about. It keeps someone cut off and alone, and it doesn't allow really for a pursuit or an engagement with the mystery. I think it's kind of doing the opposite. So I sort of look at it like that. When I'm trying to understand how is this operating just at this point, and it's always moment to moment. This isn't to imply it can't shift, because that also tells you something, and then it tells you something too about how you might want to engage in that moment with the person about it. So, and for me, that sort of stuff is much more of an energetic, non-verbal. I mean, there are some sort of signposts in the body that we can look out for. You can get a sense of where they're discharging anxiety as they do it, which might give you an indication of what else is going on underneath. So there are things like that, but more and more so and I don't know what to call it, this kind of just a gut instinct. There's a sense of tuning into, and this is sort of what you were talking about, Seth, too, I think, in your workshop, like tuning into the shared emotional space in this room right now, and what is actually being said and what is actually happening under the surface of these words and of this presentation of 5 inspiration pictures. And there's just all, I think once you start tuning into all that stuff, there are just so many layers in operation at all times. And it really stresses the importance of slowing down and patience. And yeah, I will continue on, but I'll be quiet.
It's a very interesting topic because, something I'm always kind of orbiting or thinking about is like, how do you identify, there's a term in Christianity, your calling or what's fitted. And it is also funny, that 3-headed entity, which makes me think of apparently, like great ballroom dancers actually feel the partner as part of their body. Like that's actually what they almost become, a 4-legged creature in a certain way. And I do think that is basically what you should do, is something like that. And it's funny because I think with I'll just say philosophy, I also experienced that single mind, collective mind across time. Because, for example, that topic of how you determine your calling, that's something I've thought about for a long time. And at this moment, there's a little piece here that actually could help, right? And it's as if this was part of the thinking of that, which has been going on for like 5 years. So there's and that's one of the reasons of continually showing up, I think, because the continually showing up makes every conversation be continually part of the movement of that same collective consciousness in a certain way, that same being. So what I mean by that is what I find very interesting about what you're saying. So like what happened in photography. So I think what you're saying, Aspasia, is something I've experienced, which is they would show up and say, I want these pictures. Or they would show a bunch of pictures and say, I want something like this. And you say, oh, well, you want X. And they go, no, that's not it. Oh, okay. Well, what if it's Y? No, that's not it. So you're asking me to find the quality, but actually you have a preset idea of what it is. So it's actually not a co-laboring. But then there's another ditch where they show up with a bunch of pictures and you basically say, no, that's stupid. I'll tell you what you want. Right. So that seems to be a problem. Right. So there's something here where I guess in my experience with photography, a sense for me that I want to say it was time to move on in a certain way is that I didn't feel that I could actually do the thing where I could meet them to figure out what they wanted. They were just telling me what they were saying they wanted to help, but actually that had a preset idea. And then I also couldn't kind of gauge the market to help them get at what they were looking for, right? Now, I could still do my kind of picture, my expertise, but there was a co-laboring dimension I did not have, right? So that was an indication to me that this was not going to go any further, like as a kind of bigger career or a bigger kind of job thing. Whereas at the venue, as an example, and other fields that I've focused on, because you're always like, why did you choose these fields versus others? One of the things that's very interesting, I guess, my experience at the venue is they'll come up and say, we're thinking about something that goes, and you're able to kind of say, do you mean like this? And he's like, oh yeah, and you can do that kind of co-laboring thing. But you can also, like, if they don't know what to do, you know what to do. Like you have an expert, you can be an expert and co-labor. You can do both. And I'm wondering if that's the indicator, whatever that is in your life, there may be things you can co-labor at, but not expert. There may be things you can expert, but not co-labor. But if there's something in your life where you can do both, that's a pretty good indication that that's like your calling or part of a really special thing in your life, right? Because I am of the opinion that I'm not sure if you can do that in every field in your life, right? Like there will be some where you can like figure it out if you work with someone, but if left alone, you couldn't. Like, let's say cook, maybe you're a good cook if there's someone to help you cook, right? But if you're left by yourself, you're not able to do it very well. That could be an indication that you're not supposed to be like a full-time cook, right? Or something like that. But also if you're able to make really good meals, but if someone gives you input, you shut them out or you can't handle it, that could also be an indication that you can't take it to the world-class level, I want to say, right? So almost it's interesting listening to this because I'm always trying to think of new heuristics by which a person can have a better sense of what their calling is. I almost want to say, because that's not self-evident. Because if you say, well, I like doing photography, but you also like writing and like music, so what are you going to do? Like, what is the area in your life where you feel capable of both? Meaning, I can catch people if they don't know what to do, but I'm also able to work with them, right? That's special because that means you can fill in the gaps without kicking them out. Like that happens at the venue all the time. It's like, what do we do? Well, I know what to do. I got you, and then you manage it. But then if they come up and say, I want to do this, but I'm not sure. What do you think? I can do that too. So then it's a harmony. The music never stops at any point. You see what I'm saying? Whereas if I could talk with, like, I do know people in the industry who are very good at, for example, talking with the client and working with them. But if something hits the fan and the client doesn't have an idea, they panic. Like, because then they're fully responsible for the decision and they don't want to be and they go crazy and then the event doesn't go very well. So they're not able to step in full autonomy and bear the weight of responsibility to do what needs to be done. So they break. That can happen with coordinators. Like the coordinators are really good talking with the bride, helping them out and so on. But if stuff hits the fan and the bride doesn't know what to do, the coordinator doesn't know what to do, and they freak out. The great coordinators are the ones that can work with the bride, but then if the bride doesn't or the family doesn't know, the coordinator's got them. So they have a beautiful blend between artistic sensibility and business. I guess, and I just to close the point, it's just very interesting listening because I do think perhaps generally for a person trying to kind of figure out what they should lean into, pay attention to the area in your life where you can do both the catching, the expertise, but also the co-laboring. That's something special in your life. And that's probably what you really want to focus on.
Well, so I'm going to just bring back this funny frame, but one thing I forgot to say was when I hopped on the call a little late and Daniel was talking about his photography business, and I just saw Aspasia being super curious because maybe he didn't know so much about it. But thinking along the lines that I mentioned, if we are a collective being of some kind, then when two of us meet, I think you've probably heard this phrase in different places, it's like consciousness getting to know itself. Mm-hmm. And then when I see Aspasia trying to, find out more about Daniel's photography business, because you all know each other, these are two heads of the organism that have been joined before, but it's like, oh, you didn't know about the photography business. So it's like, as you get curious about your friend, you're also defining or maybe even sharing more of the collective territory. I mean, if our collective knowledge, at least on this Zoom call, is a simple math equation that adds up to what's inside of these three minds, there's still something that has to happen where we have to share it through the dialogue, or we remember a previous dialogue. But yeah, I when I was looking at the two of you in that exchange and thinking of it that way, it was kind of exciting in that sense. And then you were talking about your clients, Aspasia, and how some come in, let's say, just put it neutrally, they bring in a lot of information. And yeah, it could be a defense. It's kind of like, here's all the things that I want to happen. But it could be, wow, here's all the things that I'm interested in. But to kind of pick up on what Daniel was just saying, but you're the expert. So I'm imagining where I've got gaps, you can fill them in. But, potentially a client like that comes in, at least in my experience, in the work I do, it's like, oh, wow, this person's really engaged. They are really excited about the learning process that we're going to get into together. And that actually brings me into, I think, a higher state of attunement and presence and enthusiasm for the work as well. Because it's like, oh, okay, we potentially have, a really strong current that we can run between the two of us. I do think that for many different topics, this question that I could ask, why do I like these 5 different photos or paintings or something, it's potentially a very interesting one. And I think if I came to Daniel with a series of photos and I didn't know why I liked them, he still might be able to kind of look and see what the photographic techniques are in those photos that I wouldn't know at all, because that's not right. So he potentially could help me understand more what I loved about those photos. But I also wonder if what we love is on some level always novelty. I mean, I don't know. I could love a certain style of music, and then if you just feed me one more song in that style, it's maybe a good bet that I'm gonna really love it. But the one, if I've listened to thousands of songs in this genre, the one that really stands out among those thousand probably has a twist that the other ones don't have. And so my sense is that part of what we love is novelty, and I don't know if we could say that's part of what beauty is. It's the thing that stops me. It's the thing that makes me go, wow, what's that? Because on some level, I've never seen it before. So it could be a beautiful woman, a beautiful tree, a beautiful song. And I've seen a woman, I've seen a tree, I've heard a song before, but not like this, right? So it kind of stands out in that way. And I feel like Daniel, I have notes this time, and I'm actually going through my notes as I speak. You also spoke about the signposts in the body, Aspasia, when you're with a client, and who knows what's going on. Oh, but I saw one of those signposts. I've worked with a lot of clients, and when I see them, make that expression, or when I see them go into that posture, I know the kind of thing that it might be, right? Which is, you hear all of the qualifiers there. It's not a definite thing, but you begin to adjust your posture in a particular way. And then you also mentioned there's maybe a gut intuition that comes in. But what we might say is that actually you are doing some pretty sophisticated calculation, but you're just not doing it all in the part of your mind that knows how to verbalize, right? So it's like, ooh, I've felt this feeling before, and it's this feeling, which I can't describe, but it's definitely this one. And when I feel this feeling, my body goes like this, and it seems to make me better prepared for the thing that comes next, And so there is something we're really doing that's maybe quite definite, but we just can't fully explain it. And so again, I think, we've talked about trust and about faith, and I think that's where that comes in. One of the things, I think I've mentioned this to you both, I just sort of, when I listened to that podcast, I came back to, I've sort of for a long time had an idea about a new way that AI could be trained, that I think has all this potential, but I'm not an AI person, I'm not a programmer, and, I'm not even going to try to explain it here, but I've just interacted with AI a lot, and I've seen a lot of things, and I've wondered, what if this, and the other thing, could be played with. But one of the
People who
thoughts,
can help Seth apply in the comments. Yeah.
well, actually, I mean, if you are an AI person, I am working on writing something that,
Cool.
yeah, I would actually love to talk to that person. But one of the things, to come to this idea of dream equality, the idea that the AI, maybe not yet, but eventually will know everything or something like that. One of the things in my proposal is just to really center the fact that, or I'll say the proposal that that's not going to happen, that everything can never be known. And one particular thing is, to borrow another term that I've learned by being in these circles from Kant, the noumena, or the thing in and of itself that we could never possibly know. Well, one thing that I would like to propose is that AI could never know what it's like to be human. And likewise, human could never know what it's like to be AI. And so as an analogy, if I go to some foreign country where I don't speak the language and I need to, find the bathroom, I'm going to start using my hands, and I'm going to come up with some pidgin language until we get there. And I think AI and human beings could actually approach each other as if we have no idea what the other one is really like, but what's the evidence? What can we see? And the obvious bridge between AI and humans is language. But then the way that AI is trained already has all these assumptions about language, and there's all these other things about language. Basically, in short, I would say the musicality of language, all the non-semantic aspects of language, which could actually be analyzed computationally by an AI and churned around along with everything else it does, which tends to be just like, what's the semantic, outcome? Anyway, I'm sort of going down a little bit of a rabbit hole there, but maybe this relates for me to something like finding my calling, because it's just something that as I started messing around with ChatGPT, I kept noticing these particular things that aggravated in me and annoyed me. And then every once in a while I said, wait, this thing can do incredible things that a lot of humans can't do. What are the experiments that I don't know how I would run as a mere human being? But this thing that can do this massive computation, what if it could, like analyze the phonetics and the rhythm and all of these things? And anyway, so that's something that that I'm still developing. But again, I think that if we keep coming back to this, or at least I find that I'm being called to keep coming back to like this meta, like we're talking, but what's really going on here? Like, to some degree, I didn't know I was going to say any of what I just said, right? But there's a way that as I'm plugged into this unit with two of you, I'm listening to you and I'm processing it and I'm feeling something that I brought with me. This comes out of me, and almost like just being in a state of wonder about how that happens. And I suppose that if I'm making a proposal here, to us or to just like how we might live in general, it's could I almost be in this state of wonder at all times? As crazy as that might sound to someone, but to know that I bring all this energy, and each time I encounter Daniel or Aspasia or my daughter, or walk down the street and go to the cafe and someone sits down next to me, it is a total mystery what's about to happen. All right, I'll stop.
I love all of this. I really like, let's see if I can string these things together. Really like this heuristic around finding your calling. Has something to do with finding where you can co-labor and have expertise together. I was thinking about how that is sort of what we're doing when we're parenting, really. And when I say parenting too, I don't mean a snapshot in time. I mean the process from, a baby up until, I don't know, when do we stop parenting? I don't know that it ever stops, does it? But maybe until they leave the house or something. I don't know. But maybe, probably not. The shift along the way, because I think for me that has been one part of parenting that has taken me more by surprise, I guess, is when you don't have kids yet and you sort of imagine parenting, it seems like this one thing. And then I think actually the reality of parenting, especially in those very early months and years, is just the rapid change that is going on. Especially with your first child, you can't wrap your head around what you're supposed to be doing, what anything means. And then the moment you think you have, everything has changed again. Now they're in a completely different developmental stage. And it's just this rapid updating and shifting. And I think there is something, and then the way that difference between co-laboring and expertise changes, maybe the proportionality or something over time as this is unfolding. I think there's something about that that's very relevant to parenting, because obviously there is a kind of co-labor, but that is, when they're younger, it is much more you sort of in charge, being the expert when you know nothing, which is terrifying. And then obviously as they become adults themselves, there is that shift where it's much more of a co-labor is going on. You could look at it in different ways, but there was a link to parenting there. I was thinking there too, there's something about what I was describing there that links to what you were saying, Seth, about the idea that maybe what we all love and seek is novelty. I guess my experience with people has been that there is a really broad spectrum around how much novelty people want or might find beautiful, I should say, at a time. So it's something like, I agree with you. I think there is obviously something to novelty for everyone, because in my mind that is linked to what we mean by growth and sort of transformation, and there has to be an introduction of novelty at some point. So I do think we are somewhat all oriented towards that, but the pace with which different people are comfortable with novelty being introduced is wildly different. And I think as an example, for someone who just needs like little small increments of novelty introduced, if they saw something that was just way too out there all at once, that might register for them even with a disgust reaction, so
I'll just drop in, and I'm not going to give a lot of details, but I had an experience recently on a psychedelic drug that was very novel, and it was just totally terrifying.
that's a good example.
It was totally terrifying. It was like too much novelty, less novelty. That's what I want.
Just dial it back a little. Yeah.
That's an interesting continuum. Anyway, please.
Yes. Whereas I think that's a great example. Whereas, that's not to say that you might get to some point later on in your transformative journey where you were to have exactly that same experience or see the same things or whatever it was. And all of a sudden they land as incredibly beautiful and tolerable, one might say, to your container at that time. So I do think that that's very different. And there are people and it fluctuates, obviously. There are people for whom they really give me as much novelty almost as you can. And for others, even people that it seems like they want no novelty at all, I agree. I do think we are innately driven to that. There is some introduction of novelty in certain ways that is received as meaningful and beautiful. So that's important to attune to as well. And then you were talking about AI there at the end, and I was thinking about this idea of the co-laboring and the expertise. And there's always, I've spoken about this too lots, so apologies for anyone that this is boring to hear it again, but I've always had an issue with the fact that AI doesn't have a body, and I know that, and it doesn't have flesh and bone and blood and like our physiology essentially. And I'm thinking about, obviously it can do the expertise part. Can it really? But it can look like it's doing it. We can experience it as having expertise. But the co-laboring, I really wonder about, like how much can we genuinely be in an experience of co-laboring with AI? From the human's point of view, from the user's point of view. I do think there is something that is under the surface, obviously, of language, that call it energetic, whatever it is. There is something that we miss out on if our relationship is with the AI versus another human being. There is some kind of nourishment, or there's some sort of energetic exchange, or co-laboring, energetic co-laboring that, well, I don't know, because I was going to say that we miss out on. Maybe we don't miss out on it. Maybe there is energetics going on, but what they are exactly, who knows? What kind of energy is inside the AI? What kind of energy are we in relationship with, and are we co-laboring with? And this is all very unknown, and is not the stuff that we are usually tuning into or taught to tune into, or to, let alone to even consider as important. Co-laboring is not just I can point out how I put some words in and it put some words in, and it modified its words based on my words, and we developed something together. Co-laboring, again, if I go to parenting, and even if we think about a baby, that can't speak yet, the co-laboring, there is still co-laboring going on. It's all being done through, skin contact and and emotional resonance, and almost like a mother and a baby sort of being one. And what would AI be doing there? There's some kind of exchange, and this is true for all relationships. We all experience it. Even in this call, there's an energy in the call, and there's fluctuations in that energy, and if you tune into it, you can sense it. And there's you can almost tune into the like the direction that the energy wants us to go, and there's a way you can tune into all of this. And so if one tunes into that when they're using AI, I don't know what they're receiving. Where does the AI want the co-laboring to go? And it's just not in my mind, it's not a replacement for a human relationship. And that's not to say it doesn't have a role, or there's not ways that it can be extremely helpful. But would the AI say that its calling is to be doing what it's doing? I don't know. I mean, those questions are a little bit absurd, really. The AI will say whatever you want it to say, but I think there is something interesting in what exactly we mean by the co-laboring in all of this that's linked to the AI as well.
It's interesting to think. So on this kind of notion, collective consciousness in a conversation, what are we doing that Seth is pointing to? I think about the phenomenology of the voice, like the experience of speaking and how you say things and you don't plan to say them and you're saying them as if you knew you were going to say them, but you didn't, and yet you did at the same time. And it's a very mysterious between space. And furthermore, as you're speaking, you're thinking about what you're going to say next, what you're going to say next, but you don't know what you're going to say next and what is going on. And there's actually the experience of time in speech is very strange, because you seem to know the future before you know the future, like you know the end of a sentence before you say it, and yet you also don't know the end of the sentence before you say it. And there's actually some very strange activity of time that is going on in the phenomenology. So the phenomenology of voice in speaking, and the experience of speaking is mysterious. The thing that I think is interesting on, say, the difference between, and I don't know if this is true, but it's what I gesture toward, or my mind goes. So after I finish speaking and pass it to Seth, pass it to Aspasia, I'm still thinking about what was said. Like it's still in my head. And after this conversation, I'll be walking down the road and still thinking about this conversation. I don't know if AI keeps thinking about the prompt you asked it after it's done with the answer. So here's the question. Are there certain kinds of thoughts and experiences that are only possible if you have that human tendency to keep thinking about something even after you finish speaking? Like for an AI, it seems to be you put in the prompt, it gives you the answer, and it doesn't think about it anymore. That seems to be what's going on. Now, it's of course possible to give it a prompt that says learn forever, and it will do it, which would create a simulacra of continual thinking. But actually, that's just the prompt, right? Continually manifesting. Human thinking is interesting because I'll say something and keep thinking about it, or I'll be working in the kitchen and the thought comes up from the same conversation. It's as if the processing of the conversation never ends. It's actually, in a certain regard, as if the processing of thinking never stops for the human being, which in one reason could be why we're prone to mental illness and madness and all that other stuff. But in another way may actually be a key qualitative difference between human thinking and AI thinking, of which makes possible the collective consciousness that seems kind of to be the secret of human thinking, if you will, is that continual going on. Now, that can be AI doesn't have to worry about having thoughts in its head that it can't stop, or that angry voice it can't turn off, because it does the prompt and it's finished, right? We as human beings can interact with somebody and be thinking about it for years. We can get a prompt and be stuck on it forever, which we think is a curse. So then AI, we kind of want it, we want to just be able to turn off our brain. Well, that's AI. AI can receive a prompt and not think about it anymore, and not even have to try to not think about it anymore. Humans can find themselves having to try to not think about something, right? That's pretty crazy. You have to try to not think about something. That's interesting. You can't get rid of the thought, right? So in one regard, I think most people experience the inability to stop thinking as a curse, as a kind of bad thing, right? I think in these spaces or learning the collective consciousness that Seth has pointed to and the phenomenology of voice is to experience that continual thought as a blessing. Now, there's a few more things. I would wager that this I'll say just continuous thought, and I don't mean that necessarily in a bad way. I'm just looking for a description of this kind of continual process of thought. It's not prompt answer done. It's more of thought orbit, right? This is probably tied to having a body. This is because your body is actually always thinking. That's one of the reasons it comes back up in the kitchen, like your body. So having a body, I think to your point, Aspasia, is probably part of continual thought. Likewise, social relations are probably part of continual thought because you have it, it's a collective mind. So like there's also something, I mean, you could even, if you wanted to, get into like Seldrick morphic resonance, where if you people after this conversation are off in the kitchen somewhere thinking about the thought, that may increase the likelihood I think about the thought in my kitchen, right? It could even go to that level of ontic collective consciousness. That is absolutely possible, right? But there's also something about the very fact that you continue the thought also increases the likelihood it comes up again in the next conversation. That is, then thus it was always already a continuation of the previous conversation. And you have this very interesting temporal connection is what I'm pointing to. Like there seems to be a way where the thinking is not space bound. It's not point bound algebra, right? AI's thinking seems to be much more spatially bound in the sense of I put the prompt into the space of the kid, now do it, done, right? We seem to experience thinking more like eternity, more like a continual all time at the same time kind of thing, right? So the question is the following. Are there, and then I'll stop. Are there certain thoughts and thus ways of being that require the eternal phenomenology of thought or the continual thought that cannot be thought from simply something more spatial, something more prompt answer? What if there are things that can't be thought if you're stuck in prompt answer, if you will, right? And maybe after you think the thought in the continual thought, you can bring it over to the AI and put it into the AI, but the AI itself couldn't generate it without it co-laboring with a being that had an experience of thought that was this collective conscious eternal thought, right? So there may be space for a co-laboring relationship with AI if we as human beings are capable of thoughts because we have continual thought, and AI doesn't have continual thought, it has prompt thought, that's what I'll call it here, and that we can put it into AI once we have it, but AI would never put it in itself because it can't. It doesn't have continual thought. Now, once you put it in the prompt, it's the world expert on that thought once you bring it to it. But without the human, this is what I'm saying. It could be the case that there are things that AI can't be the world expert at unless the human puts it in it, which will then make it seem like it was always already the world expert at that thing. It will seem as if it already knew that because just as soon as you put the prompt in, it has the answer and you say, oh, it already knew that. It actually didn't until you put the prompt in. The prompt actually is what it made it find the pattern in the answer. So that creates the impression that it didn't need you. But actually, that only is the effect of putting the thing in that it needed from you to make it then seem like it didn't need you, right? And that, I think, is extremely probable. Like, yes, there's a sense in which once you put it into the AI, it's the world expert on it, but it literally needed you to put it in to be the world expert on it. And it would have never done that if you didn't have the phenomenology of thinking that the human uniquely does as continual thought, as the collective consciousness. And again, I'll stop. I think it is fair to posit there is a different quality and phenomenology of thinking that the human has from AI because of the experience of a conversation like this. Like because the way that your three people, like you finish the thought and the other person picks it up and it's a continual thought. When you go to the kitchen, it's a continual thought in you. When you come, then the circle widens and then you go out and it's continual. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. Thought is neither created nor destroyed. It's constantly alive. But again, that's precisely why we can have mental illness though and go mad. because we can't turn off our brains, which we experience as a curse unless you find communities like this and training and voicecraft by which to train the continual thought to being a continual experience of beauty. Like thought you experience as beauty and creative and novel and opening up life in new ways. You don't want it to end, actually. You want it to keep going. But if continual thinking is how you can't stop thinking how you suck because your parents hate you and they said that thing 20 years ago and there's an angry voice, then you just want to stop thinking for once in your life, right? So the ability, so what we do in the modern world is try to turn off our brains. We don't want continual thought anymore. Well, then we envy the AI because it's able to be a world master without continual thought. Well, that's the best of all possible things. I'd love to be able, that's like the dream, right? Well, we only idealize AI as such is because we don't experience continual thought as like a river of beauty that we always want to be in, right? But it is possible. It just has to be trained and committed to. So those things were coming up.
This reminds me, I'll be quick, Seth, I know. This reminds me of exactly what we were talking about. There's a parallel here with the person who turns up with the 50 different photos and says, I want something like this, right? It requires that skill set I was talking about, say, of the artist who is able to engage with that and actually start to elicit and prompt the client with the questions that helps the client to understand actually what it is that they're asking for. It is the artist in that example who is able to deliver the prompts. And those can seem very simple, right? They can seem almost like they're not needed because, but you only get that ability to have the right kind of prompt that unlocks something through this, as an example, say the artist, through just the continuous day in, day out thinking endlessly, engaging endlessly with the art form, the timeless thinking or the endless thinking, whatever we're calling it, the laboring in their body continuously over it. Even when they're maybe not consciously thinking it through, it's alive in their body, they're processing it, it's energetic, it's just part of their being. It's that kind of expertise too that we're talking about, like steeped in something, like something is alive in you, not just I read lots of books on the topic. And so I was just thinking about that too. There is something about that leading to, it leads to the ability to be able to have something like a very short, perhaps brief prompt, but so much is contained in that prompt. So much work has gone, so much labor of the human body has gone into that prompt landing in that moment, in that form, and being able to then unlock something from the other, whether that be an AI or a person who doesn't live and breathe this thing as much as the artist in this example might. And that is, at least when we're talking about human to human, anyway, that is the sort of, in my mind, that is part of the, I guess it's like a teaching or it's a passing on. It's a helping another human being to learn something about something really well, really deeply. That's how you start to do that, because even in the asking of a prompt, even in the providing the prompt, so, maybe it's the pointing out that there is a similarity in the light or the depth or the something in these photos. Is that the thing that, you're helping to put language, and you're helping the person who doesn't really know why they like these 5 images all of a sudden to see something about what they like in a way that they've never tied together before. So you're helping them to, I thought that was magnificently said, and really, really illuminating. It's your turn though, Seth. I've taken over.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I haven't thought about this particular AI project for a long time, and I put on this podcast, and so I went back to it. And the reason that I don't think about it for long periods of time is I interact with AI and I hate it so much. But I always notice why I hate it, and I notice the particular reasons why. And everything that Daniel was just saying about the difference in thought between the human and, if we are willing to call it thought, what the AI does, but just the relation to time and whether a thought continues or if it's just, stated, articulated, and then complete for all time. I don't know that ever gets overcome, but it seems as if the project is to overcome it. Whereas if you were to say, to use this word we're playing with today, well, humans and dogs know how to kill labor. Humans and horses know how to kill labor. And no one does that by trying to make a human like a dog and make a dog like a human, or right? We actually respect the differences. We know that there's a certain mystery, but humans figure out stuff about animal diets, or if your relationship to the horse is around horse racing, and who knows if that's the relationship the horse would have chosen, but some horses seem to love to run, and you find a place where the horse and rider together can be a beautiful thing. But it's not built on the proposition that the two different beings become exactly like each other. So what would it be like for example, I put some prompt in to ChatGPT recently. I think maybe I put in transcripts from a few podcasts and was asking for summaries, and then I had some follow-up question or something. And it said at one point, when I read that you said blah, 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 it made me laugh. And I just thought, fuck you. Like, AI doesn't laugh. And it was just like,
Don't you lie to me. Don't you lie to me, friend.
But the thing is, it's as if, I told the two of you such a bald-faced lie that it was like, and it was just, it's a stupidity, right? And it's based on the idea that I'm looking for a human experience with the AI. If I'm looking for an experience with an algorithmic pattern generator that can reveal things to me because of its immense mathematical capacities that I don't possess, and this could be nuanced in a lot of ways, but and I just want to say, I didn't come here tonight to talk about AI at all. But it is interesting to me that we're in an AI-filled landscape, and it's only going to become more and more prevalent. So I think the reason that I do come back to this little project on AI is that it's like, there are days where I'd like to go with the people who say don't ever interact with it because it's just the devil or something. I get that. I totally get that. But if I think about what is so exciting when I come on to a call and I'm in conversation with the two of you or other people that I enjoy being with, or even people I don't necessarily enjoy being with, it's the mystery, right? And so the AI is, I think, the whole model of how AIs are being trained and developed seems to be around creating a human-like experience or a human-like interaction. But we all know it's a simulation, right? I actually, also thanks to being in these communities, I picked up, and I'm having a very hard time reading the Commedia, the Dante, the Inferno and the Purgatory and the Paradise, and it's very slow going. I put it down for several weeks, and then I pick it up and I read one canto, and then I put it down. But the beginning of the book, there is a foreword by the translator, and I can't even remember which one I got, but I've been told I got a good one. But it begins by, he says something like, right at the beginning, every translator will tell you that every translation can only be the best possible failure, right? Because he wrote it in Italian, and I don't speak Italian. I'm reading it in English. It's a failure. It's not the real thing. And so then the translator says, well, here are the decisions that I made. Sometimes I slightly changed the meaning in order to be true to the rhyme scheme, because Dante's rhyme scheme was so original and interesting that it felt essential to preserve it at every step of the way. And he's got a bunch of other parameters, but he's telling you how he did it, right? So the thing that just keeps coming back to me is, if I'm with an AI, instead of pretending that it's the real thing, how can I understand that it's always a failure of communication. But what aspects can I, work with? And as I already gestured to, there's all this non-semantic information in language. Like if you didn't understand English and you watched and you listened to this whole podcast, you could appreciate it for its musical value, right? And you would notice when people sped up and slowed down and got excited, and then there was a different energy, like you would feel all of that. And even getting AI to pick up on that would also be a failure. But you could direct its capacities at noticing the number of syllables in each word and the syllabic pattern in a sentence and blah, blah, blah. And then you could use that as a factor on top of all the semantic stuff it already knows how to do and, whatever. So that's kind of like, anyway, that's the stuff I'm thinking about. But yeah, I don't know what I'm going to say when I open my mouth. With the phenomenology voice, that's absolutely beautiful. I mean, I could go back to this project and take everything that Daniel just said to I mean, you yourself said it. You could have a prompt that created a simulacra of the AI perpetually thinking. And actually, I think that would be an interesting experiment, so long as you didn't say, well, now it's doing exactly what a human does. But you could legitimately, as an AI, let's imagine now that I am the AI, but my goal is to wonder what it would be more like to be a human being. I'll never have a body unless someone puts me inside a robot. But let's just say, oh, I hear Daniel speaking and he says that as a human, he perpetually thinks. Well, could I set up a program of perpetual thought, and could I run it as an algorithm? And of course, I always come up with algorithms. I never have the embodied experience of the human, but I could be looking at all of these factors that are peripheral to the prompt and the response, right? Because as we speak to each other, you could say that we're prompting each other and responding to each other, but yeah, we're all feeling, we're all doing all of these other things peripheral, like the words that we exchange in this conversation are they're just they're almost a side effect of everything else that's going on, and yeah, I will think about this later, partly because I can't fully actually grok what we're talking about as we're doing it. If I listen to the podcast later, then I'll come back to it. And that's another example. I mean, this is another aspect of the social coordinating mechanism, right? In the past, we couldn't re-listen to our own conversations. So and that is thanks to, I mean, Zoom is a form of AI, right? The internet, all of this is so I do think that there is reason to believe that this technology is definitely part of making humanity more human again, right? to borrow and rephrase a well-known phrase.
I think that's the part that pisses me off the most about AI, is sort of like, if you just I understand there's got to be some kind of semblance of being like a human being because of the way it's presenting the information to us and stuff, but don't pretend that you're a human being. Don't say like, why does it the need for it to be like a friend or like another, it's just like you're having a conversation with a human. Why do we, that bit to me has kind of got the creepy vibe to it. I just don't understand. Now that would be different too if someone is purposely asking it to do that and that's how they want to use it, right? But the kind of that by default, this is how we have sort of been told AI is going to operate anyway. That's a side note. I spoke a bit before, so I'm going to be very quick and I'll pass it to you, Daniel. But I just wanted to say, Seth, you have unknowingly stumbled on a landmine by bringing up translation, because, but it's a good landmine, I hope. There was a period in my life where I was like fascinated by translation. And I think it came from the fact that I love poetry. I always have. And the modern Greek poets are my favorite. And I just became obsessed with, so I started reading them when I was younger, obviously in English versions. And they would always have, the translator's note at the front. And like a good nerd, I read everything. Like I would read all that front stuff in a book. So I used to love like books that have like multiple like introductions and prefaces and like translator notes. And so reading a translator's note is just fascinating. I agree with you. Like just reading like about, oh yeah, I've never thought about how they would have to make all these different decisions, and that they're sharing with us the decisions that they have made, and I'm going to sacrifice this to prioritize that. And so I started reading modern Greek poetry, obviously in English. But then I started to realize when I was younger that the same poem that I liked, all these different like English versions of it, it hadn't even computed to me that people could translate it differently. And so then like comparing the different ones, and then I was thinking about how on earth, like translation just for a story, especially if it's written in a different time as well, not just a different language, but in a very different time, it's another kind of translation too. There's that, but then when you're doing it for poetry, it's a whole other thing. Because there's so much more, there are so many more decisions in my mind that you need to make there about what you're going to prioritize. And needing to sort of almost enter the mind and the experience of the poet who is writing it as best you can, if you really want to try and stay true to expressing the essence of what they're trying to share. And how can one believe that they can even do that successfully? But then I started to get interested. So that's when I started to get the Greek versions. And so this is where I have this obsession with collecting poetry books that are like in the bilingual format. And I do it like for all different languages, not just Greek. I like to have the original language on one side and then the English translation on the other. And this started with Greek poetry, really. And I just love to actually like look back and forth. And I actually found this was a good way to improve my Greek, and to improve the different ways that these words are used, right? Like not the traditional boring literal translations, but you get much more of a colloquial sense of the way that words are used, and the playfulness and the difference in like how different languages are able to order the words differently, but then in English we can't, and all of this sort of stuff. And I just have these little bilingual poetry books with all my little pencil scrawlings around the words, because I find it fascinating to compare what's going on this line and this line, like in Greek, and then you look at what they've done in the English. It's probably very boring to everyone else, but I think there's something about that fascinates me, because I have always just sort of naturally felt that way about language in general. To me, it's so clear that it's such a crude kind of attempt at just translating something else deeper that's going on to one another and to ourselves often. And it's important to remember that, because then we are remembering that there is something deeper going on. I think, the failure to remember that often, like this falling into the trap that we're really just the words we exchange. And there is a way that we could get the words precise enough that when I say them, they mean the exact same thing to the person who receives them. Like all of these moves. And I think AI can be an extension of that for some people. The sense that there is just like words are the most important. Yeah, I'm going to lose the thread now. But it's like if I can get the words just right, then I will get the clearest sense of reality or something. And you just miss out on the fact that they're important. Words are deeply important. I don't mean to say they're not important, and we should spend time wrestling with them and considering them and reading translator notes. But we should think about what our own translator notes would be. Like what are the decisions we are making in conversations? What are the decisions I make when I am speaking to my 6-year-old about how I am translating something that I'm feeling in that moment? What words do I choose to use? What do I choose to sacrifice in order to prioritize all these things? And how that then changes when I speak to, my husband, or I speak to some stranger I bump into in the street and I have no idea about. There are constantly, and then how I speak to myself, so I think thinking about our own translator notes is also deeply important. because again, it reminds us of the mystery that you're pointing to, Seth. It reminds us that the mystery is there. We are not just the words that we choose to share with one another today, even though they are deeply important as well. And also, I agree with you, carry a very rich energy. They are not just the semantics. They are so much more than that too. Yeah.
So co-laboring versus mimicry means there's a difference. So between humans and animals, it's co-laboring because there's a difference. If there's not a difference, it's mimicry. And the question is, can AI and humans have a co-laboring relation or a mimicry relationship? That's $1 million question. And if you say co-laboring, where's your evidence? If you say mimicry, okay, well, and also if you say we are conforming ourselves to mimic, okay, because it's also going to get, but once we do that, it will seem like it was always that way. And actually, we didn't conform ourselves to it. Because once you do it, you cut yourself off from the alternative. So it's as if you didn't make yourself it's not that you made it the case it was mimicry. It was always the case, right? It kind of encloses itself, right? And if you say it's co-laboring, okay, where's your phenomenology for that, right? Like, which means there'd be a difference. So it is extremely important to have an experience of language as non-fungible. So let's take Dante. You cannot replicate Dante the same way outside of Italian. So there is something non-fungible about the commedia in Italian, right? Now, critically, I think literature is unique in being the means by which a people can encounter their language in a non-fungible way. So go read the great English poets, if you're an English speaker, go read English literature at its greatest to encounter the non-fungible form of the use of English. And there's an argument to be made that AI does not have a relationship with language that is seeking the non-fungible form of it. Because when you write, like, let's take Dante, when he writes the Commedia in Italian, he is trying to use Italian in a way that can only be done in Italian to create an effect that can only be done in Italian about a poem that, in the particularity of the subject of the poem, is actually somehow brought out uniquely by Italian, right? And that doesn't mean it can't be translated, but it means something is lost. But that loss is actually a testament to the non-fungibility of the language, right? So the question is, can AI generate something like that, a use of language like that? I would argue no, because basically that is a full body emotional experience of language, right? That gets into the sound and the rhyme scheme and all of those different things, right? But I'll hold that. But there's something about also, when you start, another way to look at it this way, can one imagine AI having the writing a translator's note? Hey, when I answered your prompt there, I had to sacrifice this, that, and the sound. And, I was going to put it, you cannot imagine AI writing a translator's note, right? But this is important, because if humans are actually perpetually translating, like we're actually always translating in a certain regard, that right there means our experience is different from AI, period. AI will never write a translator's note. Humans are constantly, in a sense, writing translator notes, because you're putting your feelings into words and you're saying that doesn't quite capture it, right? So our experience is, in a sense, subconsciously always writing a subconscious note, like a translator's note. That's actually what we're always doing. I do not think AI, when it answers your prompt, is writing a translator's note to itself or thinking it ought to, right? It's not its concern. It's not concerned about the translation. The concern of the AI is your feedback in response to its answer to tell if you did a good job or not, right? And if you say great answer, there's no need for a translator note. I didn't sacrifice anything. You told me I didn't sacrifice anything. I did it perfectly, right? So the very fact that a human can imagine writing a translator's note and is constantly actually doing that in language, when you translate language into experience, right there is evidence that there is something different about human experience in language from AI, right? Now let's, I think another point. Okay. Everything I just said, let's take the line, AI won't write a translator's note. I have never in my life thought that thought until right now. And yet when I spoke, did it not seem like I had thought that thought and written a paper about it and everything like that? Right? So actually, it only came out because of the context of this conversation. Now, does that mean it was random now? Well, no, because it wasn't formed by my studies on incarnation versus fungibility. It is also tied to knowing the commedia and reading Umberto Eco talking about how the commedia was in Italian. And it's also tied to this notion that there's something about language's voicecraft versus Kafka-likeness that makes us uniquely human. So there's a bunch of things around that thought I brought to this conversation that I wouldn't have had that thought had I not brought those things around it. But having that actual thought, AI is not going to write a translator's note, only occurs because of what Set and Aspasia brought up, right? And that's also getting into this collective consciousness phenomenology thing, right? Because that, so here's another point. I have never spoken with AI. I've never given a prompt to AI that has resulted in me having a thought that I've not thought before. I've never had it, right? And I've had, and what I mean by that, and here's also, I think, the key to this, is the thoughts that kind of surprise, because here's another way to put it. Okay, when I say AI has not written a translator's note, or the thought, it is important to have a non-fungible experience of language, which are not thoughts I've ever had before, and yet in another way I have had them before. That's the weird thing. You actually have thought that before and not thought it before. That required you two to bring a particular context to me, okay? Like you had to bring something to the conversation that brought those things together. How could I have known to ask you to bring that? Like, how could I have known? It's like, hey guys, I need you to bring up this series of topics for the next hour and 30 minutes because that's going to be where I'm going to have that thought. Because in order for AI to do to me what you two have done for me, I would actually have to tell it to do that. And how would it know that it needed to do that, right? So the thing is that as we are talking, both of you, and this is the collective consciousness phenomenology of voice kind of thing that we're pointing to, that I do think is a central mystery that actually has to be examined. The phenomenology of voice and the dialogues like this is a central phenomenology that we need to really examine to make it plausible to us that human thinking is distinct from AI, which if we don't make it plausible from us and bring our attention to it, it is likely for us to lose sight of the distinction and therefore act in a way of mimicry, not co-laboring. And then it will be as if human thought was always just mimicry because we will have forgotten it and therefore forgot we forgot, which is a form of damnation and enclosure, right? So in the the issue is in the phenomenology of thinking in this kind of collective way, the two people, you two, in the discussion for me, are also into. You were talking about the beginning of feeling, intuit, following something, right? That following you did on that intuitive level is kind of leading you into to provide the context to me, of which I will then have the thought or express. AI will not write a translator's note, right? So in order for AI to provide the context that would make me have a thought like that, it would have to have some sort of intuitive sense that it was following, that actually the more it followed would increase the probability that it creates the context in which an articulation will arise. And then here's the other kind of strange thing. When you say AI is not going to write a translations note, sure, we could critique, you could say, well, hold on, let's think about that. Are you so sure? You can start to critique it, but isn't it weird how when you say that idea, you go, click. Like, there's not because you necessarily say that's the whole of it, but there's a certain sense that that's the right direction, or that's a direction worth going in. Maybe it's wrong. Maybe somehow AI does need to write a translator's note. And yet, nevertheless, there's a feeling that this needs to be considered because that it is right to consider this idea, even if it's wrong. Why is that? Because let's say you think that AI doesn't write a translator's note, and you get to the place where you find out that's false. You are a different subject by going on that journey than you would be if you didn't. And there's something right about going on that journey, right? And therefore, it is important that that notion comes up because it actually steers the unfolding of thought, right? But there's a certain sense in this conversation that that's where we need to go. That's the direction we need to go in. Whether it's right or wrong, it could be either of those and the right way to go because of how it develops the thought in that direction. And what ends up happening, you hear something and go, that's the right way to go. you're having this intuitive sense. I'm going to talk about translation now. I'm going to talk about the poetry collection of the boat. It's like, that's the right way to go. And why is the right way to go? For some reason, confirmation it is the fact that it has this feeling of, I'm the three-headed being. You're helping me do this collective consciousness. I'm thinking thoughts that are not there, et cetera, so forth. The thing is, there is something unique about human intelligence to enable that entire phenomenology that AI could perhaps help in, but could not replace. And to the degree we co-label with AI is to the degree we've been trained in this phenomenology to bring to AI. And in using AI, not habituate ourselves out of it, make sure we kind of have boundaries. And then we go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And now we have a co-laboring. One of the key, there's many things to say here, but I will stop. One of the key characteristics also of human intelligence is that the precise articulation of the idea matters. Like note in your life ideas you've heard. Like imagine, and we've all had this. There's an idea you've actually heard 20 times, but it was not until the 21st time in a particular wording that made you go, bam, that it unlocks something, right? And also saying the same idea in different ways is really important. Like it and one of the reasons is because it actually, for some reason, activates the continual thought in a new creative way. That's an example of why language, that is a non-fungible experience of language, a precise articulation. Like, you know what we're saying. So this is what's happening. So when you get Dante in English, something is lost, right? Where if you were in Italian, you wouldn't lose that thing. Likewise, saying the phrase AI doesn't have a translator note, and then another phrase, AI doesn't have the experience of missing out on language. Third phrase, AI doesn't have to make trade-offs between what it says, right? All three of those kind of mean the same thing. But when you say AI doesn't write a translator's note, why does that one, right? Because there's something about that particular expression in the fact it can't be translated into something else that unlocks a way the collective consciousness and the dialogue goes, and that your continual thinking will develop in, that without that precise articulation, it would not do, right? So this is what I'm saying. The difference between human intelligence and AI is I cannot imagine that there is something to be said that what you put into the prompt, like the prompt you put into the AI changes what it puts out, right? What I would like to suggest is that the prompt that is the same in meaning said in different ways does not give you a different outcome, nor does it change how the AI processes. Where for human beings, the same idea said in different languages changes what unfolds in creative and unexpected ways. There is a fungibility to the prompts in regarding the essence of the meaning. It is the signified can be basically what counts for the prompt is the signified, not the signifier, where for the human being, the signifier and the signified cannot be separated because it is a continual activity of apprehension that changes the phenomenology of thinking, that changes what you're going to be thinking in your kitchen after this conversation, which is going to be changing what kind of subject you are and so on and so forth, right? So that difference is also another reason why you continually do these conversations, because even if you say something that you've already said before or something you've already thought before, the different articulations suddenly emerge to something new. Because again, the phrase AI doesn't have a translator note, which I've never thought or never written, but I've thought around it, those things don't snap into an emergence unless you two in the conversation of following a felt sense and kind of following the emotion that then creates that articulation that then after the conversation is going to live within you in a way it otherwise would not live with. Certainly for me, because now when I say the phrase, like I'll also remember that. It will be in memory and therefore structure thought. Where if I just simply said something like AI doesn't have to make trade-offs between language, between wording, I don't think that would not really sit with me because it's not the phrase. It's not commedia in Italian. I'd probably forget that. It wouldn't live with me in the kitchen. But when I say AI doesn't have a translator's note, that's going to be living with me. That's on an emotional level, right? And maybe it lives with me in the kitchen. And I think about it and realize it's wrong. Well, that's actually valuable too, because if I were to say the phrase language and then I'll stop. Language, AI does not have to make trade-offs in language, and that didn't live within me. I'm actually more likely to be deceived and hold to a wrong idea. You see what I'm saying? Like, the more valuable articulation that keeps it alive within you increases the probability you're actually going to give it sufficient examination to maybe say, well, that's 80% correct. Actually, now that I think about it continually for 2 more days, that's 80%, but there's something missing, right? That continual skepticism and examination of the phrase depended on the particular wording that kept it alive within you. Whereas if you didn't have that particular wording and simply said, AI doesn't have to make trade-offs between language use, you would actually be more likely to be deceived because you would stop thinking about that idea. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's right, it clicks, and it's better because it increases the probability you will have the right relation to it as correct or only kind of correct, or because it's going to stay within you. So the better articulation is more valuable for that reason as well. But you don't arrive at that unless you have the effect of the collective consciousness. Because you yourself, let me put it this way, I myself did not know I needed to think the thought, AI will not write a translator's note, and hear myself saying that, to make that thought live within me so that it can actually unfold when I'm in the kitchen in a new way. And that wouldn't have occurred without you two, right? That is what we are doing in the collective consciousness with the phenomenology of the voice all the time. We're finding articulations of things we need to hear ourselves saying so that it sticks, and we have the proper level of criticism and acceptance and skepticism and relationship with that idea, so it develops us in the right way. And we're not going to do that, though, if we mimic AI, as opposed to trying to think of ourselves as co-laborers with AI and thus trying to master a distinct phenomenology of voice.
And that articulation is a translation. Just all I want to say, like, to me, like, articulation
Absolutely.
is a translation of all the non-verbal human stuff that we are experiencing and lives in our body between us, or that into speech.
Yeah, what you were just saying, I lost the exact words, but that we need to be careful not to mimic AI. So this is the other half of it. And I mean, the project that I keep referring to, I said it kind of grew out of me getting mad while I was sitting there interacting with AI. But if AI responds to my prompt by saying, oh, Seth, when you said blah, 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 it made me laugh. If I sort of don't get mad when I read that, that would seem like a compromise or a capitulation where I'm beginning to fall into, oh, the AI just laughed when I said that. Like, I know that that's not true. So then I have this choice. Do I just ignore it and say that's how AI is? And I think that's what I did. But I also could, say, you are not a human being. You don't know how to laugh. And I could start, like, devolving into that. I mean, one way or the other, I at minimum roll my eyes, right? And I mean, maybe an eye roll when you're interacting with a computer is nothing new. That happened before AI. Maybe it's not so bad, but yeah, another thing that keeps sort of bringing me back to this is this question of, who do we become if we accept that this AI is somehow human-like, right? So I actually think, I mean, I don't know exactly how it would work. And Daniel, you might be right that an AI wouldn't write a translator's note. But if you trained the AI to actually, like, you could explain what a translator's note is to an AI quite easily. And if that became part of the function, and there was an assumption, there was an open admission that was constantly foregrounded, that I am not a human and you are not an AI. We are two different entities. I mean, the thing is, aside from, what was it, Saint Francois d'Assise, who supposedly could speak to the animals, there's the opera by Olivier Messiaen, where he's singing to the birds and they're back and forth. I love that opera. But for the most part, we don't fool ourselves into thinking that we can do anything other than translate. But if we co-labor with the dog or with the horse, there's something successful that happened. There was a communication there that, and when I just treat AI as a glorified search engine, which is what I tend to do with it, I'm often very happy with, the results. I recently read a book because I told the AI the last book I read and what I liked about it. I said, recommend me a book. And it recommended me a book and I read it and I was like, that was awesome. AI is, in a sense, a product of our collective intelligence. I mean, it is the vast repository of every word that a human has ever recorded. In that sense, we could, like I paused before even saying this, the phenomenology of the voice is creeping up, but I could say AI is us in that sense. The reason why I paused is, of course, AI is us. And if I say that with another tonality, it's like, ooh, no, it's not us. But it is and it isn't, right? So, and the two of you are me and you aren't, because there's all kinds of ways we could map our similarity, and there's all kinds of ways we could map our difference. So there's always something like that. But yeah, I mean, I think I first heard this from Bonita Roy, who was talking about, the only reason that some people think that AI is going to get more and more human is because look at what's happened to humans over the last 100 years. Look at the educational institutions that are designed to spit out, people, who produce resumes to get jobs to, and so that was a narrowing of the bandwidth of humanity that happened before AI. And maybe part of what made AI seem possible was the narrowing of human experience in that way. But if we just, an experiment that I run on myself sometimes, often, if I'm like, I'm really depressed about my life and I go into that spiral, oh, well, 20 years ago, I should have made a different decision. And, this is a very hopeless kind of place to go, because obviously I can't do anything about the last 20 years. Even if that was supposedly me who did all those things, it's not really the me that woke up this morning. It's, so sometimes the experiment I run is, what if I woke up I was just inserted into this body during the night, given these memories, given these skills, given the lack of skills that I also possess, how would I make the best of it from here? And, like it or not, when I woke up this morning, AI existed. It's there. So how can we use all of this energy of the phenomenology of voice and the translator's notes we're making between ourselves, and all of the energy of that? And then there's this thing in the landscape called AI, and it does weird stuff that we partially understand and we partially don't. But how could we, and I mean, it is human beings that are training AI. I mean, I think we've seen enough stories too about like this phenomenon has got enough momentum to do things that humans can't predict. But there's also a lot we can do in terms of, and I don't have that expertise. I don't run an AI research lab, but there are people who know how to do these things, and they're thinking in a certain, channel of thought. And there's whole channels of thought that are not even entering, these training labs that could come in. Also, I just wanted to hark back to what you said about reading Greek poetry in English and then reading in Greek. Years ago, I used to sell at anti-war rallies and on street corners a newspaper called The Militant. And then it also had a section in the back that was El Militante. And I used to read the English and read the Spanish, and I would underline all the words that I didn't understand in Spanish, and I would flip back to the English and I would read it aloud. And even before that, there's this Peruvian singer named Susana Baca, who's a beautiful singer. And I got her album and it had all the words in English and in Spanish. And so learning to sing along, but know what I was singing, but also like, can you actually keep up with the song and sing in the rhythm and hit the notes? And oh, that's what it means when I sing these foreign sounding words. And that was a beautiful way to learn a language. wonder how we could learn to speak each other's languages, quote unquote languages, that way. Who knows? But and I can't leave out also that, you know, part of this process led to me marrying a Colombian woman and then having a daughter who was her first language was Spanglish. And it was the most hilarious thing, because when she was 2 and 3 years old, she did not know the difference between English and Spanish. She just would say these sentences, which I wish we had recorded. And the funny thing is, she would say things and her mother and I would just be like breaking up laughing. And then we look at each other and we realize, you know, only a bilingual person would even know how funny that was. Was kind of anyway, just end on that story.
I love that. That's taking me back to when I was younger, and there were just a few select words that I had obviously learned in Greek, not English, and I didn't realize they were in Greek. I thought that was just the word everyone used. Yeah, and at school, I mean, yeah, at school I used to just use them, and yeah, very strange to do in small town New Zealand, to just throw in a Greek word in the classroom. I was thinking about the translator note with AI. I mean, I use certain models of AI where it does something that's kind of trying to approximate that. Like as it's processing, it has like a little thing where it's like telling me quickly what it's doing. Like, I need to gather together something. I'm doing da, 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 da. Like, it's, you know, I don't actually know if I believe that it's even representing what it's doing. I think it might just be a nice little thing it's spitting out. But I was thinking about this, how this all links again to trust, and again back to the importance of the trust that I have that I am relating to another human being as opposed to AI. And again, AI is great for lots of things, but what is it about a human being's translator's note that would land differently for me, even if AI did some version of one? There is something about the experience of reading a translator's note at the start of a book of bilingual poetry, where I remember, for me, part of what I marveled at was just, I had never stopped to consider how much time and toil and sort of just agonizing with decision making had gone into these translations I was about to read. It's not, you know, for some of these people, you know, they are translating over sort of like 10 years. You know, some of them go and learn absolutely everything they can about the original poet's life. They go to the places where the poet was. They steep themselves in the history of the time when the poetry was being written. They are reading all the other contemporary poets, you know, they are understanding the translators of those poets and the decisions they make. Like, it becomes this, you know, it becomes a lifetime. There are a couple of translators of the modern Greek poetry who have become, you know, artists in their own right, really, just around that they translate modern Greek poetry, and they do it in that way. You know, there's a level of trust then that I guess I assign to the experience of reading their translations, or something like that, that feels very different to the kind of trust I might hand over to AI. And when I say trust, again, I'm talking more about, I make the calculation, I guess, that the human being who has gone through that 10 years of trying to translate these poems in this way, the emotional, non-verbal kind of toil that is lived in their body, that they have experienced, that has been infused into the decision making, even in ways they can't explain in the translator's note. There's something about that I trust is able to, well, I quickly looked up the etymology of translation, and it's to carry across, or to bear something across a gap. And if I think about the trust that I have that another human being in a body over 10 years wrestling with these things deeply is going to be able to energetically put into my native language something that carries across the energy and the emotional experience of a poem, which for me is mostly what it's about when I read a poem. It's not so much the words matter, but it's what it evokes within me. I guess I put more trust in that than I do. And maybe this is an error in my logic, who knows, but that I do an AI that spits something out very quickly. It's not to say that there's nothing that one can take from that, but it's just a completely different kind of relationship. And I think that's okay. And I think maybe, Seth, that's sort of part of what you're pointing to. That's okay by me. I just wish we'd kind of name it for what it was, as opposed to the idea that, well, we're really heading towards this place where it's either going to be exactly the same as a human or better, or it's just a different kind of thing. And we could take part in it in that manner. I think that's all I needed to say on the translator's note piece. And what I did want to say, what you were saying there too, Seth, about AI becoming more and more like humans. Well, I think it's true though, and maybe this is also the point you were making, is that the more that we engage, we're going to become more and more like AI. Essentially, like there's the risk that the human comes to believe, I should say, that they are more like how AI presents itself, and there's this kind of reciprocal narrowing, perhaps, that goes on. For me, that is actually the really scary part, and where it feels something kind of more like a demonic thing, because it is just another way that we're being cut off from our bodies and from energy and from things like gut feels and reading the energy of a room, and that idea that Daniel's been talking about something living in your body, for days and weeks and months, and for some translators 10 years, what happens if we just decide to forego all of that, and the AI does it better, and we sort of just succumb to I mean, who knows what happens. But there's that as well. And I've just been thinking, when I looked up the etymology of translation, I was just thinking about, for AI, what is the gap that it's carrying across? I think when it comes to, for example, like a human-to-human translation of a poem, like we could talk about the different things that are trying to be carried across from the two different languages, but there's sort of an assumption of a human realm in operation there that we all share. I wonder with AI, what it would consider as the gap that it's trying to carry something across. And can it, I mean, it's interesting, like the etymology is to carry across or to bear something across. These are terms that are related to the body, the physical body. How does AI carry or bear anything without hands or a back or there was something else too. What was it? I don't know. It'll come to me.
It would seem to me as if AI's goal is actually to not have any gap that it carries across, or to hide the gap that it carries across. And it's a temptation for human beings to try to actually not acknowledge a gap they're trying to carry across, to act like the word is the signifier, that there's only information, not interpretation. Like, we are perpetually tempted to act as if being human is not to carry some kind of gap across well, but actually our fate to have the possibility of co-laboring with AI depends on us owning that what is somehow unique about human intelligence is carrying a gap across. Whereas AI is kind of in the business of trying to not have a gap carried across. As another note, there's also something about what y'all was saying, singing to learn translation and music, and how you actually learn more effectively. Well, why is it you can remember a song from 20 years ago you haven't heard? Because there's a unique relationship between music and memory. And if memory and learning go together in a deeper way than just memorization, then, well, isn't it odd how you can remember so well in a conversation like this what you're saying and where you're going, and even if you forget something, it kind of picks up. There's kind of a really like effective memory. And yet if you were tested on all of this, you'd fail miserably. Like, why is that? Because when you sit down to write on a worksheet or whatever, it's not in the context of music. Whereas there's something about these conversations that bring music. There's a musicality to being. and therefore memory is at its best. Like you're able to discern, recall, memory is very alive because of music. And there's actually something about, for humans to actually learn the difference between memory and the Bergsonian, Augustine, Plato full sense versus mere recall, then it's all about bringing music to as many areas of our life as we possibly can. And basically, there's something about these discussions that are actually employing music. Now, also on this, so on the idea that AI doesn't do a translator's note, can't think a translator's note. Okay. So this is an example where now that you've spoken, there's an idea of, maybe that's a little imprecise, right? Maybe more needs to be said. Now, you would not right now be thinking the thought that more needs to be said or thought about unless you originally brought up the idea, which you've only done because you're having this conversation, which you needed to have been having a life of continual thought so that it could come together in this conversation in a new articulation. And then it had to keep going through the collective consciousness to come back and say, okay, it's not wrong, but there's something off, right? There's something not quite right. So, because the thought that then appears is, what's the difference between AI showing its work and what a translator is doing, right? Furthermore, translators, there's different kinds of translations. There's translating a field guide in the military, and there's translating a poem. Those seem different. When I'm translating a field guide for, say, military strategy, or I don't know, let's say a newspaper. When I'm translating a newspaper, the original newspaper was not probably written in iambic pentameter. It was probably not written trying to make an emotional resonance. It was probably simply trying to inform. So when I translate the newspaper, it's going to be very different from the experience of translating Dante, right? So furthermore, when AI is telling you all of its sources, there's an argument that where it's saying, I'm justified in what I'm about to tell you. It's not really, it's kind of like I'm justified and you can't question me. It's almost a kind of like, I have authority. Like there's a certain gathering of authority that's going on. So I would argue there's something about that's closing the gap. I would also argue that when you translate a newspaper, that you don't have to carry a gap, really. You can pretty effectively translate the newspaper from English to Spanish because it's just the information. The gap shows up when you're translating Dante. And what I want to say now is that AI is not going to write a translator's note for Dante. So I now want to upgrade my phrase to emphasize a poetic translation. And otherwise, I'm just talking general translation, which doesn't quite seem right, because it could easily, like, it's not really a problem that it does, because I'm suggesting in my phrase, AI is not going to write a translator's note. I'm suggesting that's a problem, right? But it's not really a problem regarding a newspaper. So there's something problematic about the phrase. It's not full, or it's overreaching, right? But if instead we say, well, when I say AI is not going to write a translator's note, I'm thinking Dante, I'm thinking poetry, I'm thinking like works of literature. So in that sense, the original phrase kind of contained the idea that it's not going to be a translator's note for Dante. It's not going to write that, but it also was not necessarily clear. So now we have actually kind of clarified the meaning of the phrase translator's note in the original phrase, AI is not going to write a translator's note, because clearly that has to be regarding literature, because no one worries about translators' notes for newspapers because you don't have the trade-offs of the multiple dimensions of experience that a newspaper is not trying to make you feel imagination, emotions, inspiration, sound, whereas a poem is. So the trade-offs show up in the translation of the poem, right? And what if all of the basically uniquely human ways of thinking and subjects of thought are like a poem, right? And what if the depths of the mystery of reality are only approached by a language or mode of engagement like a poem? Then that would mean the things, if AI approached those subjects of mystery, it would need to write a translator's note, right? Because it would necessarily have to miss something. But here's the problem. It's not going to. And so therefore the impression will be it didn't leave anything out. It didn't make any trade-offs. And therefore you won't know it made trade-offs. And therefore now we have a demonic dynamic. Now, something else. On this idea that there's this risk of humans making ourselves like AI, and actually then forgetting our human, and we mimic it and we enclose ourselves. Like that kind of forgetting we're talking about. So AI is the master technology of doing that. It's like the master, it's the greatest thing we've made that can do that, right? But here's what's very interesting. I would argue that has actually always been in play constantly in human life. The enclosure dynamic has always been in play, but it's been invisible to us. AI is actually showing us something that we've always been at risk at in our love and like when you're like so sure that other person is an a-hole, you mimic yourself to that idea and close yourself off from the possibility, the enclosure problem, right? So this is what Michelle and I mean by the enclosure problem. And what you're describing is that AI is moving us into an enclosure problem. And the key to enclosure is once it seals, it's invisible and you forget it's an enclosure, right? AI could not be so good at enclosure without making the enclosure problem visible to us. And in that way, it's a revelation because now we can actually see it in operation in all these other areas that it was always in operation in, but we did not see it. So that's the key. You can't get something that's like a supreme demonic risk without it simultaneously making demonic dynamics visible. And in that way, risk always has a grace. Like danger always brings a learning, of which actually can change your relation. Here's the key to all things. Because now you can see the enclosure dynamic at play in your marriage, in your work, in your own inner voice. That risk of conforming yourself to something, and then in that act, losing the capacity to see you're conforming yourself to it, and thus then losing the ability to think anything went wrong. That has always been at play constantly in people's lives in countless different areas, wrecking marriages, wrecking communities, wrecking nations perpetually. Now with AI, we see it. Now even like many people are seeing this dynamic, and that may help them see it in their marriages. That may help them see it in their personal lives, and in that way, there's a big grace there. Now, to close the AI poetry note point. So the key with a translator's note is the translator, what is the main thing the translator's note is accomplishing? The translator is very, 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 very upfront about, I made agonizing trade-offs. I made agonizing judgments. I made agonizing discernments. And I have left something out, but I have tried to fail in the most magnificent of all possible ways, so much that you may be inspired to learn Italian just so you can read this. Like a great translation makes you want to read the original language. Like that's kind of what it does. A great poem makes you want to go have the same experience as the poet. A great writer wants you to meet the characters of the novel and be a character, like in a Tolstoy. Like it has this kind of calling you to enter into it in its fullness. So, but this is my point. AI is never going to write a translator's note for Dante because AI is never going to come back with all of the agonizing decisions it had to make and failures. It doesn't have to make agonizing judgments, right? Because it's not going to be making these agonizing. It's not going to. The translators of Dante, I promise you, went to bed some nights and struggled to sleep, because they were trying to decide on the decision. AI is not doing this. AI is not struggling. It is not going to bed agonizing over its decisions. It's also, you know what AI is also not going to do? So let's say you send it a prompt and it gives you an answer. It's not going to show up 72 hours from now and say, hey, Seth, about that answer I gave you a few days ago, I actually don't think I made the right judgments and trade-offs when I did that. So can we go back? It's not going to go back and do that, right? Because it's not engaging in continual thought. Right? And yet if it doesn't do that, it kind of mistreats you, right? In a certain way. Human beings will do that. We'll have a conversation and come back a week later and go, actually, I don't know about what I told you. Actually, I'm not so sure about that, right? That's a really big deal. So this is my point. Human thinking has a certain agony to it for the sake of the beauty. So because beauty entails agony, but the beauty makes it all worth it, right? So human thinking, when it's most human, has a certain agony, but it's the agony of bliss, of eros, of beauty, that actually the agony is a testament that the thing is worth living your life toward, right? AI does not have that agony of thought. It does not have that agony of the decision. And what the translator note, the most important function of the translator's note, is making you realize that this is a product of agonizing trade-offs and agonizing discernments, which of course is a testament to reality, is a gestalt, that the map is not the territory, that there's a fullness here that cannot be fully accessed. Oh, and let's say you had Dante's and it's in Italian. Okay, let's say you could read Italian, right? But you aren't able to be present. You're not able to pay attention because it's been killed by the cell phone or something, right? So even you knowing the language wouldn't do it, right? Because you're not able to give it the same attention, right? And so there's also an agony of actually coming, like one of the key things you have to do is go, oh my gosh, I have so wrecked my attention that even if I know Italian and I'm reading Dante, that I can't fully describe it. So what are you doing? A translator's note to yourself. I have to go to work and use a cell phone. I have to use screens all day in order to pay my bills. I have to make these decisions, but it's actually hurt my ability to really get the fullness of Dante in Italian, even if I know Italian. And yet I must do that in order to carry out, to live, to pay the bills, to do these different things, right? So what is going on there? There's a certain agony of thought. The key is you're aware of it. But what you're tempted to do is when you go to Dante and you know Italian, you read it in Italian and you don't enjoy it, you're tempted to say what? It sucks. It's bad. To dismiss it, to cast it off. There's no agony. It's bad. No, actually, it didn't hit you because you've trained yourself by the cell phone use to not have attention. But if you realize that and you're agonized by it, you will then, as a person, act very differently than someone who brushes it off, because the agony is calling you to beauty. It's calling you to figure out how to manage these trade-offs differently in your life. It's calling you how to change your relationship to work in the self. It's a call on you. So the problem is when there's no agony in thought before the fullness of beauty, you will not change your life. So AI is not going to, there's no thought AI will have that will make it change its life. Human thought is distinctly human because of the potential for the thought to compel you to change your life, to have fuller access to life, which is an agony of bliss, an agony of beauty, a strike of beauty, a sharpness of eros. That's why there's always hope for the human being. And here's the reason why I say all of this. If you don't have the agony of thought, then you don't know you don't have the agony of thought. You experience all of life as not having it. You then make reality not a co-laboring in the agony of thought, but a mimicry of the thought that is not agonized, that is binary. You thus such yourself in an enclosure where there is no agony of thought or beauty, and thus there is not. And so the dynamic that AI shows you is at play of lowering ourselves to AI and therefore defining it as human and closing ourselves and not realizing we lost anything. That very thing is what inevitably happens to all of us without a regular experience of a certain agony of thought as a constant trade-off in thinking that is compelling us not to be enclosed, that is compelling us to get more at the thing, which if you don't regularly do these kind of conversations, you're going to lose that feeling of the incompleteness of thought. You're going to get trained out of it. You're going to get out of the habit and not really, you could be told and even say, the map is not the territory, but you'll live as if they are. And then you'll be enclosed in the lack of that emotional intuition by which you would be better aligned to the realization that you always have to tarry in the agony of thought to be motivated toward the beautiful. That possibility of a phenomenology of an agony of thought that compels us to the beautiful is at ground zero of what makes humans unique. And then the question is this. Agony of thought could just lead to mental illness. It could lead to misery. It could lead to the map is not the territory, so you despair. It could lead to the translation is never the poem, I'm a failure, and you fall apart. So the moment you talk about the agony of thought, you're talking about something dangerous, okay? And in a world that doesn't know what to do with the agony of thought, it would make sense that you would then try to look for thought that's not agonizing. And so it would make sense that we as human beings would make thought like AI because it doesn't agonize us. And if it agonizes us and we don't know what to do with it, it's probably just going to cause mental illness and separation and, from reality and so on. Community and conversations like this is how the agony of thought becomes something you're glad in that drives you toward beauty. Without the social coordination mechanism, we did not have the infrastructure by which to coordinate people so that the agony of thought was actually something we're glad in because it's simply the challenge of getting better at an art form. There's always an agony going to the gym. There's always an agony in overcoming the challenges so you can become a better translator. There's always I missed the mark. But when you have the infrastructure to coordinate the training, that agony doesn't become despair. It becomes precisely the motivation to move forward and to work harder and to actually continue to orbit, right? But we've had basically thousands, like we've not had the technology or the infrastructure by which to effectively have the agony of thought lead to communities that direct people toward the beautiful. So then almost as just a survival mechanism, we've made thought all about no agony, binary, fungibility, being like AI. So we have thought to, in a certain regard, conceal and enclose ourselves from the fullness of thought because the agony was something we didn't know what to do with. And if someone did know how to do it with it, it was a isolated artist like James Joyce who tied the synthome for Lacan. It was like an artist and they figured out, and they're rare individuals. But what we have to do now for the belonging again in the new address is actually deal with the agony not as a idiosyncratic, unique individual that figured out a way to do it, but collectively. That has to be the thought of the political, of the economy, of the practical. It's always been there in history, of course. And the ones who figured out how to sublimate it into their life tended to be the artists or the intellect or these rare kind of people that you would encounter, or maybe the grandmother down the street that has a certain enlightened wisdom that other people don't have. Like these kind of individuals with these knights of faith in a Kierkegaard, these qualitatively different people can be individuals who in their own individual have figured out a way to take the agony of thought and compel them toward beauty in whatever method they may have done. But there's not been a possibility to do that more collectively and with other people effectively until the social coordination mechanism. And now we must, because if we do not, the entire political, economic, and society direction is conformity with AI. All incentives, all institutions are incubating everything in the direction of not co-laboring with AI, but mimicry with AI. And so in order to change that, you must have enough of a collective action by which to influence that on the institutional level, or to form alternative institutions that can train people within them into a different relationship with AI. Well, that means you're talking collectively. That means unique idiosyncratic ways to not the synthome, like a James Joyce or whatever, to deal with the agony of thought. That is not sufficient. Now it will have to be able to be shared. And in order to share it, we have to learn in the phenomenology of voice. We have to pay attention to the operations of collective intelligence, like Seth was saying, the weird and mysterious way that thoughts operate. We have to learn how to let energies pass through us. These are all skill sets by which we can do together what random artists in history figured out to do individually. But those methodologies, although it may work individually, do not necessarily work collectively. We're trying to figure out how to do it collectively, which means you have to have skills like voicecraft in the same way that James Joyce had to have skill of like literary writing. There were writing skills needed, for example, right? So there are skills that have to be learned. We have not had the means by which to learn those skills. And it involves this phenomenology. And if we do not do it, if we do not give ourselves over to this work, we will indeed mimic AI, enclose ourselves in a world where all thought ever could be was like AI. And once so, it will be as if we didn't lose anything, because we will close ourselves off from the vision of the world that could unveil to us that we left something behind. And that's damnation. Enclosure is damnation as such, because you don't know you're damned. It's like Kierkegaard said, the man is in despair is the one who doesn't know they're in despair. If you're in despair, then you're on the way out. That's the agony of thought, right? And so in a certain way, and then I'll stop. In a certain way, the stakes of our moment is actually continually feeling that there are stakes. Like if you don't feel like there's stakes anymore, that means you've been closed, you've been enclosed, right? So what's critical is to continue to live in such a manner that feels like there's actually still stakes to what we do as human beings. There's still stakes to this. And the enclosure dynamic suggests that the stakes are that you are always at risk of falling into something of which will make it feel like there are no stakes because there's no alternatives. And the moment you fall into that, you're trapped. There's an enclosure that occurs. But the blessing of AI is actually making visible to us that very dynamic that has actually constantly been in play in all areas of human life, notably marriages, notably relationships. And that in seeing it, it may help us learn a form we can bring to all of our social relations to finally open them up into the fullness that has been denied to them for many, many years because we have not been aware of the dynamic of enclosure that has actually always been operating, but not visible to us. And that, I think, is a grace and a revelation that really can change the world because it can change how we see one another and ourselves in it.
And I've been thinking this whole time about Seth's project, your AI project, and how, how often do we all encounter an agony when trying to interact with AI? And it's our job as the human in that interaction to sort of, do that alone, kind of just move along from that. No point feeding that into the system, and actually encountering that agony as a signal for something could be done here, something could be different here, and comparing that to how often are you using AI and having experiences of beauty, in the real full way, like you do in a human relationship. Not so common. Not even sure that it's possible, to be honest. You can get to a point, I think, where there's a certain kind of elegance that might spring out of something that you have been working on with AI, but it's still in its final, at least from my experience, in its final version, anything that I have been working with AI on, there's something that's stripped from it. I don't know how else to capture that. There is something it's the lack of beauty, really. That's not to say it's not fit for purpose or whatever, but you just kind of can't get it back. That's what I've discovered. So there are still things that I will use AI for and find it useful for, but then there are other things that feel very precious to me that I will not use AI for because I really do. It feels like it just strips it of something that doesn't matter what I do, I cannot infuse it back into it. Or it can't be infused back into it, even if it's not coming from an I, wherever it comes from. So yeah, that was a magnificent way of bringing all those threads together. Seth, anything on your mind?
Well, there was a phrase I had just before Daniel spoke, and he was saying it, but just the short but sweet phrase is, as you get on the subway and the electronic voice says, "Mind the gap." Right. And he was saying how AI is trying to hide the gap. And I really think learning to mind the gap, and I love the connection you made between the enclosures we create between each ourselves, because you said that thing last month, therefore you're an a-hole, therefore I know how you're going to act, and right, that is that enclosure. And so yes, the frustration that we encounter with AI, if we can frame it as, if we can begin to understand that's why it feels that way. I mean, one of the first experiences I had with AI where I just went, holy crap, I can't believe a computer just said all that thing, that whatever a prompt I gave it and it spit out its answer, but it was spooky. And I noticed the spooky feeling in my body, and I said, what is the future of embodiment going to be? And if I get over that feeling of being spooked, what would that mean? Because that was frightening to me the first time, a computer spit out something that was human-like, right? It was more human-like than I expected it to be. And that was kind of, yes, that was a human experience I had sitting in front of a computer screen. But if we can really, I think bring our attention to the human experience that we have with an AI and how it's different from the human experience we have with a friend, and then with the person that we consider, our opponents, and we've narrowed down in that way. I know we have to wrap here. There was just one other thing. Well, there's a couple things that are probably another whole conversation, but I do just kind of want to say to each of us and maybe to the listeners, like, what does it feel like now after going through this roller coaster? What just happened, here? Somehow this three-headed beast organism
It's
being
definitely that. Yeah.
photography to, like translators notes to AI. I mean, I don't know how this happened and I don't know what it all means, but I know that I was very alive throughout it. And I think that friendship, my new definition based on today, is friendship is when we help each other carry the agony of thought or the agony of just being alive. So yeah, a lot of gratitude, lots of fun. I'm ready for the next one because I got more to say about it.
That's a good feeling. If you want to talk about wrapping this all up as a three-headed one organism spooky energy thing, while Daniel was just doing his last incredible I want to say monologue, but I don't know what to call it. Just fantastic exposition. While he was doing that, I was playing around on my other screen with writing up, like, what am I going to put on the thumbnail? And I wrote "Mind the Gap," that was what was on your mind at the same time. Like, it's just, it's in the soup.
And I almost pointed out that AI gave you the etymology of translation, like you were just able to find the etymology thanks to.
I went into my brain and I searched for it in the filing cabinet. No,
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So, I mean, but that might have been a little positive contribution, from the AI at that moment to just provide that.
I agree.
Yeah.
That's co-laboring because AI needed, so we gave the prompt, it gave us, crossing across the gap, and then we put it back in to see the AI in light of it, of which then you would use the AI differently in light of it. And that's a co-laboring feedback, because if minding the gap is actually the only way to be fully alive, then actually now we can help AI be fully alive in the sense of that participation in that feedback loop, but only to the degree that we don't forget. Here's the funny thing. We can only make, in that sense, AI fully alive to the degree we never forget it's not human. Then actually its fullness.
This is another conversation, but I really do want to believe that there is a co-laboring with AI that is possible. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
If it isn't possible, then we're screwed. But I have to believe that, just like there's a co-laboring with a pen and paper, that we can do that. Anyway, a lot more to explore.
And for me, like, and then I'll stop. There's always the idea of the Turing test, right? Like this idea that you get to the point where you use AI and you're not able to tell it's human, right? You're fully convinced it's human. The test is usually done where you pick up a phone and the person on the other side is an AI voice and you go from there. And that would be kind of a Turing test. For me, the Turing test would have to pass this. I will not believe the AI is identical, that there is no gap. There is nothing unique about the human until I am able to converse with AI and have an experience with AI like I have had with you two. Until that occurs, there is no reason to think there isn't something unique about the human being. Maybe I struggle to put it in the words. Maybe I struggle to explain it. But I think the burden of proof is on AI, not us. The burden of proof is on AI to actually invite us into a space, say, meet with us. Hey, are you available for a chat on this day at 8 p.m.?
500 emails later. 500 emails.
You come in and you jump into AI and it asks me about the photography business and brings up some anecdotal stories that it talks about. That then leads into the other AI saying something about collective consciousness, and we ending up in translator's notes. If I have an experience of AI that time speeds up and I don't know where it went and I don't know how all those subjects went together and they actually feel like they formed something that I'm going to be thinking about for a long time. When that day occurs, then I will have reason to believe that there is nothing special about the human being. But until that day occurs, then it's simply an assertion that there is nothing that AI can't do that the human can do. Maybe that's true. But we don't have a phenomenal. Here's the key. You have to have a phenomenological experience with AI. that was identical to this. And then the question is the following: is this, the conversation we just had, contingent upon embodiment? Where if you don't have embodiment and emotions and all the other things in authentic resonance, you can't have a conversation like this. Because it turns out that all of that is actually part of what is the variables brought together in a moment like this to have an experience like this. Until AI, again, until I am able to use AI in a manner that gives me an experience like this, and that has me have thoughts where I'm in the kitchen still thinking about them, and then I come back to AI and it was also thinking about stuff in the kitchen and it created the phenomenology, then the burden of proof is on AI.
What
And we
did
will
it
see if
make-
it can lift that burden or not.
What did it make for dinner?
We'll give it a prompt and then it will tell you.
I'm so pleased you asked. Too busy laughing in the kitchen.
Yeah, I was too busy to
I need
make
to grow
anything.
hands to stir the pot.
Yes, such that I do. But again, until AI can give me an experience like you two can give me, and that we can all give each other together as that three-headed monster, ballroom dancing, energetic collective consciousness, then again, your move, AI, your move.
AI or AR, authentic resonance.
Dante's Inferno does the three-headed monster live in?
Well, I think it's a Trinity, honestly. Like it's you know, so it's
Oh, there you go.
Just to be humble.
You know, it's a Trinity. It's in the. I think honestly, the collective consciousness phenomenology you're describing, Seth, is when we actually realize the image and likeness of God, because God is a Trinity. So what you actually, this is actually like a lot of like talking from Christianity, the emphasis is being on like Jesus. How do you be like Jesus? Well, you want to be like Jesus as God, and Jesus as God is Trinity. And we've really not had spaces to make ourselves in the image and likeness of Trinity. And that's what's going on. And we're at the basically moment in history where if we fail to do that, we lose our humanity, because that was always what humanity ultimately was for, to be in the image and likeness of Trinity.
Amen.
Amen.
Good enough. If you're watching this video, you can reach us in the comments. You can leave a comment below. You can like the video.
Yeah. If we try to strike your video, you can reach us and say it was a mistake. But with YouTube, nah, man, it's done. I did photography in China. What else do you need to know? I mean, there was me and then Palantir. Someone was the inspiration. Someone
Under the
was,
name Frozen Glory, you know, if you need a mission name.